All right, let's play a little game here. How much would you pay to be able to make fantastic coffee on the road no matter where you went? 20 bucks, 50 bucks, maybe 75 bucks, 150 bucks, 500 or maybe even more? Some people would. This is a $150 travel coffee brewer, and it's called the Weber Workshops Roadrunner. The Weber Workshops team sent this over as a sample unit, and the very first reaction that a lot of people have to this thing is about the price. And depending on who you ask, this may be a thing that should not even exist. And yet it does, and people buy them. So the immediate follow-up question is, why is that? And there are a couple of reasons for that, some of which lay a few layers down below the surface. But first, I think what we need to do here is make a cup of coffee with it. So when you get the Roadrunner out of its nice little neoprene bag here, you pop the top off and out comes the lid and several of these little bean cellars that just kind of pop out of here. And when you go to make coffee, you pull the pod out of the bottom here, and then you take it apart. Inside is this little metal filter here. It also comes with paper filters. So I'm going to load a paper filter in there as well. And you put it back together. You use the lid to push the pod back down to the bottom. And then you take one of these little coffee cellars and you can either grind up your coffee, or as I've got one pre-ground in here, you can just dump it in. And then basically I'm just going to fill it up with water. And very gently, I'm going to let this little gizmo thing spin down gently down there into the coffee. And then you just let the timer run up for a few minutes. Basically, it works exactly the same as the $360 Weber Workshops Brewed brewer. Unlike that one, this version of it has a couple differences. In addition to being $150 instead of $360, the carafe is made out of Eastman Triton plastic. The black pod down here in the bottom that the coffee sits in is also made out of Eastman Triton plastic. It's just pigmented. It's got this cool little anodized aluminum handle, really kind of neat mechanism in there, the way they've worked that. Part that spins down into the coffee is made out of stainless, and it's got these little bean cellars as well, which are polypropylene with a silicone lid that has a one-way valve in here. So after this has sat for about 3.5, 4 minutes, something like that, I'm going to start spinning this little thing at the top. And you'll see that center start rising up here. And what's happening is the little hooks on the claw at the bottom of this thing have hooked into the pod and are actually pulling it up. And that's creating a vacuum under here, which pulls the coffee through the bed, through the filter, and leaves it in the bottom of the carafe. It looks kind of like a French press. Really, it's not. If you want to go on a fun little side project, you can research the Clover brewer. It actually functions quite similar to that. It's a pretty amazing brewer that Starbucks uses to make really good cups of single serve filter coffee. And you just keep turning it until the seal pops. Seals are made out of silicone. I forgot to mention that. And then you just pull the whole pod assembly out, and then we can pour ourselves a cup of coffee. Let's see how this tastes. Oh, it smells good. Okay, that is a really good cup of coffee. This is a decaf, actually, that we roast through our roastery project. It's a Red Bourbon thermal shock decaf. I'll leave info on that down in the description, but this is a really nice cup of coffee. Very good. Now, when I make coffee with this thing and I tell people it's great, you inevitably get the comments with this and the bird. Yeah, dude, whatever. It's basically going to be the same as my French press. And I have to say this, it really is different than a French press. And in my opinion, it's better than a French press. Now, are you moving into the territory of diminishing returns? Sure. But you do get a different brew, and it is also a much more flexible brew than a French press. More than that, though, it's actually really hard to mess up. In fact, it's one of the things that I love about both the Bird and the Roadrunner. You put your coffee in, and you're almost guaranteed to have a really good cup of coffee. But we have to be honest here. A really good cup of coffee doesn't have to cost you $150. So in order for this to work, there's got to be some other things that you're paying for. And in the case of the Roadrunner, one of those things is deletion or streamlining. And when I was brewing that cup of coffee, you may have noticed something kind of weird for me. I didn't use a scale at all. I had my coffee pre-portioned out. I actually had it pre-ground actually even. These ones over here with the whole bean coffee, there's about 30 grams in each one of these. So by the time you use all 3 of your cellars, you could have 3 big cups of coffee or 6 smaller cups of coffee. And none of that you need to weigh out because you've done that ahead of time. Also, when you're pouring the water in, there are level markings on the outside of the Roadrunner, which is really nice. So as long as you know roughly where your water level should be to get the right ratio with the amount of coffee that you're using, you can just go at it with a kettle, fill it up to the right amount. And maybe it's not going to be totally exact, but it's going to be good. And when you're traveling and brewing coffee, not having to worry about a scale is pretty nice. A couple other things. It comes with that neoprene sleeve. If you want to buy this for your bird, it costs $30. It's got this nice lining in here. The metal tin for your filters. The handle collapses in flat. And when this all goes together, it's in a really nice streamlined package. You don't really need a lot else. Even when it comes to a kettle, like as long as you got hot water, you can do a nice brew with this. You don't got to bring a gooseneck like you would if you wanted to bring a little travel pour over dripper or anything like that. Any kind of hot water, even if you're pouring it out of a cup, totally fine with this style of brewer. So even just with the addition of these cellars and the level markings on here in the case, this is moving a little bit more from being just a brewer to being a bit more of a travel system. It's kind of self-contained. There's minimal other things that you need to bring or worry about, which is really nice. And if you're a bird user, like you got a nice bird at home, you want to brew like that on the road, but you don't want to bring your nice glass bird, the parts are actually somewhat interchangeable. The pod that you use in the Roadrunner, you can swap out and use the metal pod that is in the bird. The cellars will fit in there too. They'll just stick out just a little bit more if you try traveling with the cellars like that. It's basically the same functionally as they're much more expensive brewer. There is another brewer though that gets brought up a lot in conversation about both the bird and the Roadrunner, and that is the Aeropress. It costs $40. It doesn't have the bean cellar thing going on or the case thing going on, but you can still do the no scale thing with the way it's set up. And if you know anything about the Aeropress, you might be thinking, okay, $40 here, $150 here. The math is just not mathing. Sure, this is a little bit better, but is it that much better? When you get right down to it, both are made of plastic and both make a cup of coffees. So what gives here? Aeropress has been shrinkflating their product a little bit, pulling out little accessories that it used to come with. It used to come with a case. It doesn't anymore. Reducing the number of filters that it comes with, which is not great. Some of their products are maybe definitely priced pretty aggressively for the value that they bring, but at $40, an Aeropress is still pretty good value. The Oxo Rapid Brewer is another brewer that's been getting a lot of hype lately, $45. Again, it doesn't come with some of these bean storage things, but it accomplishes a lot of the same thing. The brewing mechanic of the Roadrunner is a little bit different than either of those and offers a pretty good deal of flexibility. In terms of how the cups taste, it is an immersion, means the coffee is just kind of sitting in there. No bypass brewer. It's a bit of a combo how it works. And generally that's going to result in a very intense, big presence cup, sometimes a little bit more blending depending on how you do it. When I'm brewing with either this or the bird, I go for a higher clarity cup, and I do that by grinding very coarse, going really light on the agitation, and then doing a slow pull, and that gives me a crisper, cleaner cup. But if you're into like really tea-like, light-bodied V60s, this can move in that direction, but it's never going to give you totally that. I'll leave the recipe that I use down in the description, but overall, the cups are really nice, really good, basically every time, and really difficult to mess up. Before we get to other ways that you may find value in a brewer like this, couple of considerations. Number one, there's going to be some performance differences between the glass version and the plastic version. Now, when I tested this, I found, if anything, the plastic version actually held heat a little bit better, just by a couple degrees Celsius. Some other things that you might want to think about: if you go really heavy on the agitation with this thing, one thing I found with both the Roadrunner and the Bird is that you can splash coffee grounds right up here into the little spout. And then when you suck the pod out, the silicone seals are good to pull the coffee grounds out and kind of leave everything there nice and clean, except for this spout. So sometimes you're left wiping out just a little bit of coffee grounds from there. Also, the cleanup routine is not for everybody. And if there's one thing that people tend to not love about both the Bird and the Roadrunner, it's the cleanup. It comes out in this pod, then you knock it out, then you got to take it apart. If you're using the paper filter, you got to scrape it kind of off of the metal filter with your fingernail or whatever, and then you got to rinse everything off. Also, this is made of plastic. It's good plastic, but it's still plastic, and it is made for travel. So while this looks great right now, it's a pretty sleek design. It's got this smoked look and, Weber does design well. So it looks great. It's not going to look great forever. And I think that if you're using it on the road and treating it like a travel brewer is something that is probably eventually going to happen. Also, Weber added this thing into the mix, which is actually really great. It slips into the bean cellars and allows you to fill them up a little bit more easily. Love that they included it. I'm about 99% sure that I'm going to lose this thing at a certain point. All those considerations being given, the Weber Bird and Roadrunner are some of my most consistently enjoyed brewers. And the Weber Bird, before I got the Roadrunner even, was actually my main travel brewer. Still though, even if you're all in on how the Roadrunner works, the workflow, the types of cups that it gives, the considerations aren't a big deal for you, you like the way that it streamlines your on-the-road setup, you can still get to the price and feel like, okay, like this is a lot for this thing. Weber makes nice stuff. They make nice stuff, it looks good, it's designed well, it brews well, and it's expensive. And part of what makes them expensive is a couple layers down underneath the design and user experience. Eastman Triton is a nice material as far as plastics go. Anything that touches water is going to either be made out of that or silicone or metal or paper. But to really understand these products, you got to go a layer below that even. When coffee people buy coffee, we don't just look for the best coffee that we can find at the cheapest price. It's more complicated than that. In fact, we'll actually pay extra to be sure that the people who are farming the coffee are being treated fairly and compensated well. When it comes to the equipment that we use, we don't tend to apply that same logic to the things that we buy as much as we do to the coffee that we drink. And very often when I ask product manufacturers about their labor standards, the conditions at their factory, I get actually very dodgy answers about this kind of thing. That is not the case when I asked about the Roadrunner. In fact, when I started poking and prodding about this conversation when it came to the Roadrunner, Weber was actually happy to share that their approach that they took, offering me way more detail than I normally get when I ask companies this kind of stuff. They are working with a contract OEM manufacturer on the Roadrunner that is based in Singapore with a factory just across the border in Malaysia. This is a company that specializes in medical plastic products, actually. And even though the Roadrunner is a new product for Weber, there is a pre-existing relationship between some of the people on the Weber team and this company that goes back 25 years almost even, which is a long personal history. So when it comes to manufacturing, that's very often a good thing. The Weber team is actually on the ground at the factory, basically monthly at this point. So again, that's a lot higher frequency than I would normally expect to hear from a company working on a product like this. And when it comes to their labor, the contract OEM manufacturer has fair labor practice standards, as well as environmental responsibility policies, freedom of association and collective bargaining, and even a whistleblower channel for its workforce. Now, depending on what country manufacturer is operating in, some of those things can actually be, believe it or not, illegal. And when I got digging into this stuff with Weber, making sure that a lot of that stuff was at the core of somebody who is going to be working with them on a product was very important to them. Also drives up the cost. And, when I've asked Weber about this stuff on other products, I've seen this same pattern where they have a very high priority on the well-being of the people who are actually making the products that they're selling. But they actually go a step further than that, even when it comes to their global footprint as a company, which I find very interesting. When it comes to setting up their supply chain and manufacturing for their line of products, they actually try wherever it is actually possible to stay out of countries that are non-democratic or hostile. It's actually the only company that I'm aware of in the coffee space that explicitly takes a stance like that. Now, could Weber just say, we're not going to do that, we want to find cheaper manufacturing? They could do that, but it would mean operating in a way that doesn't align with their values. So when you're considering the value of the Roadrunner, that is certainly part of the equation in the same way that it is with our coffee. Not talked about very often, but maybe we should talk about it more. It's designed well, it works well, the coffee tastes great. More than that, it's ethically made, and it's the combination of all of those things that make up the value of the price tag. Now, some of those things may not be important to you, and thus the brewer may be less valuable to you. And that is totally okay. You may also say, I think it's a couple steps too far in terms of diminishing returns for me to want to go to that degree to brew coffee on the road. Or you may say, it looks cool, it brews great, good enough for me. I would pay $150 even without any of the other stuff. So at this point, there's a broad spectrum of opinions about these brewers, and this is the case with all of Weber's stuff. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the Weber Roadrunner in the comments below. I'm also going to leave my review on the Weber Workshops Bird, so if you want to go a little bit deeper into how this whole system works, you can find that video there. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.